All right, hello everyone, and welcome back to the Box Office. Today we have a special episode. We're not riding the box office train back to 1999 like we usually do. Instead, we're taking those Pym particles and going back to the year 2008, when the original Iron Man came out, comparing that to the behemoth that is Avengers Endgame, which came out this past weekend, April, when was that? 26th? I'm bad with dates. I'm here today with Marcus.
Hey, how's it going, everybody?
And making his back to the box office debut, James.
Hey, everybody. Happy to be here.
All right.
So then I guess, let's just jump into the numbers a little bit. So as Danny alluded to, Iron Man 1, it came out in 2008. And I know a lot of people have talked about, this whole progression, all the 22 films, the whole MCU, and basically being 11-year journey. But here are some numbers to think about from the journey and kind of where it began. So Iron Man 1 opened in May of 2008, and it opened at $98 million, and it opened in 4,100 theaters. So ultimately, in the U.S., it grossed $318 million, and outside the U.S., it grossed $266 million. So to kind of put those numbers a little bit in perspective, so Iron Man 1, even though $98 million by today's standards doesn't sound like an incredibly high amount of money, or it doesn't sound that, especially in comparison to Endgame, it was actually considered a pretty good opening at the time. I mean, even by today's standards, a film opening at $98 million is that's pretty respectable, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, maybe not for a Marvel movie as we have come to know them, or any of these real big tentpole like comic book movies, but definitely a movie opening at 98 is respectable. I don't think anyone's going to say it's a bomb.
Yeah, no, and especially too for its first outing. I mean, that was the first film in its franchise, $98 million. So, yeah, I mean, that's definitely a number to take into account. And I guess one more thing before I jump into the numbers for Endgame. Iron Man 1 opened at $3.5 million on its Thursday night opening. So on its midnight release, it made roughly $3.5 million. So to now kind of jump into the numbers a little bit for Endgame. Its Thursday night opening made $60 million. Its opening weekend, including that Thursday, was $357 million. It beat the record of the biggest opening before it by over $100 million. Let's see. Obviously, it's the biggest opening by far of all time. It had the biggest wide release of all time as well, with 4,600 theaters. And also an interesting point is that 71% of its entire gross so far has been internationally. Or it's been international money. So now that we kind of talked a lot about those numbers, I guess we can kind of dissect them a little bit, point by point. So I would guess, well, Danny, what do you think about the fact that Endgame has already made more money? It's already made $100 million more domestically in 5 days than Iron Man made in its entire run.
Yeah, I mean, not only did it make that more than Iron Man in its entire run, the fact that it made $357 million, like you said, $100 million more than the second highest grossing film in one weekend, right? Which is Avengers Infinity War. Mm-hmm. So it didn't just like creep over the line. It didn't so when you had Infinity War beating Star Wars, the Force Awakens, it beat it by about 10 million.
Yeah, something like that.
And going back to the year whenever Spider-Man came out, it was the first $100 million opener.
Yeah, was that 2002?
Yeah, it made 114 million or something. Like, you have this incremental growth where you got 114 million, then maybe you got 130 million with Pirates of the Caribbean, Dead Man's Chest, and then you go on there from like usually 10, 15 million to maybe like 40 million at the high end. This movie made 100 million more year over year than its predecessor, which is astonishing.
So, I mean, there's none of this idea of, inflation.
No, exactly. Yeah.
There's nothing. I mean, it's exactly like you said. I think one more point, too, is I haven't heard anybody necessarily list this yet, is that all big milestones have all been done by a Marvel movie. Now, even though you mentioned Spider-Man, that wasn't a part of the MCU, but the first $100 million film was a Marvel movie. The first $200 million film was Avengers, the first one, Avengers. In 2012. And now the first $300 million opening is in Endgame. I think that's also really crazy.
Yeah.
I think it's just a property that's successfully building on itself. To be able to build on all those superheroes, to start with something like Iron Man, which was in its simplicity the beginning of the MCU, but to build that over a series of character arcs and to continue to build on that and to have a successful launch with the original Avengers. I think we've been able to see how that can essentially offshoot into successful franchises and to create what is now the MCU universally.
Yeah, I mean, I guess even for Iron Man 1 at the time, and I mean, we're definitely going to probably get into this point more, and obviously all three of us too, we have a friend that works at the studio that released Iron Man 1. And you know, that studio, I mean, they had an opportunity to purchase the MCU, and I mean, it's easy to look back and say like, oh wow, like look how stupid Paramount was for not buying the MCU when they had the opportunity. I think one thing that makes it even worse is that it was already a successful film franchise by that point. Like Iron Man 1 was the 8th highest grossing film of 2008.
Yeah.
Like it was a success already.
But they said, I mean, there's no way they could foresee how successful it would become, and who's to say if it was still under Paramount whether it would become what it became? Because Disney Disney just knows how to do this better than anyone, and that's why they're in the position they're in.
Well, I think with Paramount they did the first 4 films because Universal did Hulk, but Paramount did Iron Man's 1, 2, Captain America, and Thor, which was only. I mean, like, you know, Avengers 1 only came out 1 year after Thor and Avengers, or Captain America and Thor.
And there was a lot of skepticism. I mean, when they sold to Disney, people said that was a high price. Disney paid over $4 billion for that price, and people thought that was too expensive for the MCU, essentially. The MCU, at one point, was a brand that was struggling, that was going through bankruptcy. People thought, why pay $4 billion for this franchise? Disney was overpaying. The mouse was going crazy, spending this much money. Yeah. And ultimately, it was part of a broader strategy that Bob Iger had of acquiring all these franchises for the Disney company. Say what you will about the growth of the Disney company, but ultimately, it has proved to be fairly successful. We look at the amount of money that projection-wise Endgame's going to make, and how it's not only this box office number, but the sales you're going to make through action figures, the way you're going to integrate this into all your properties at the parks levels. These are things that Paramount couldn't intrinsically do. Paramount doesn't have a park. Paramount doesn't have a streaming service that's going to be successful at some point to launch this brand to the next level.
Yeah, I mean, they went for the short. It was a short game.
Yeah,
they got $4 billion. That's great. Now, you know, they're making Sonic. So
yeah, Paramount.
Hopefully, you know, good fortune to them.
They could have had Endgame, and we'll settle for Sonic the Hedgehog.
It's not a bad consolation prize. I was very enamored by that trailer, but that's a different topic.
I think one more thing, or another thing I want to raise the point about when Iron Man 1 came out is that, I mean, people could talk about like how the box office today is so much different than the one of 2008. And I don't think anything is more evident of that than you look at the top 10 highest grossing films of 2008. So the highest grossing film of that year was The Dark Knight, which, if you were old enough to remember when The Dark Knight came out, that film was huge. I mean, a lot of people really loved it. I think at the time of when it was in theaters, it was the second highest grossing film domestically of all time.
After Titanic.
Yeah, so it was a really big deal. And that was a superhero film. But the second highest grossing film of 2008 was Indiana Jones 4. It was $785 million worldwide. Indiana Jones 4 made $200 million more than Iron Man 1 in 2008. I mean, how crazy is that? I mean, again, you fast forward 5 years. 5 years later, in 2013, Iron Man 3 opens with $1.3 billion.
It doesn't open with that.
Oh, sorry, not didn't open. No, that's Endgame numbers. But no, yeah. Total gross was $1.3 billion. And yeah. I mean, it's so weird to me because I think that the jump between 2008 to 2013, box office wise, I think that jump was greater than 2013 to now. I feel like the box office in a lot of ways has been kind of similar for this decade when it comes to what films are making money and kind of what's really popular out there.
Yeah, it's really, I mean, it's a testament to how much audiences respond to these specific characters and to that, the brand. I mean, the Disney brand really carries a lot of weight. And they put their, regardless of what you think of the movies themselves, I mean, there's 22 films. You know, are all of them excellent? I don't think so. I don't know. I honestly haven't even seen all of them. I never saw Thor: The Dark World, but there's this Endgame in the numbers that we're seeing. It really is a testament, like James said, it's a culmination of this journey that they've taken us on that really people have gotten invested in. Yeah. And it's also important that people are invested in it domestically, but also internationally. And this is, we've compared this a lot to Star Wars, but the place where Marvel really excels over Star Wars is that Star Wars doesn't really have international appeal. Certainly not in the big markets like in China, where they really don't care for Star Wars as far as I know, and there's a lot of reasons for that. But Marvel just seems to be a lot stronger worldwide.
I mean, I shared that article with you guys, the other day about, people will come to Disney's Star Wars defense and say, oh, well, Star Wars doesn't make that much money overseas because, the audience there isn't really familiar with the property. I mean, people in China aren't familiar with Marvel films. That's a newer thing. And I sent you guys that article earlier today or yesterday, whatever day it was, where it was the day-to-day tracking compared to China. The movie Endgame's only made like $60 million more in the U.S. than in China.
Yeah.
I mean, if that were to hold true, the numbers that Endgame made in China this past weekend, it would have been the biggest opening of all time in the U.S. still.
Something about those numbers, though, I don't think that it has made, they're comparable. You said like $60 million difference, but I think the movie opened in China on Wednesday.
Oh, okay.
And so it has 2 additional days of box office.
Oh, okay. Well, then I guess that probably alters
so
it somewhat.
there is that. But I mean, I think you can make that argument in terms of, oh, well, it made this much money, like 357 or 1.2 billion, whatever, because of that. But the difference between number 1 and number 2 in international gross and also just domestic isn't enough to, well, I guess it would be just international because we're considering China, but that's not enough to account for just those 2 days.
And China is a relatively younger market. So if you have a franchise that spans a series of time, and granted, we know the source material is very old, the comics are very old, relatively speaking, but the source material spans a period of time that begins with the movie we're referencing, which is the 2008 Iron Man. That source material is newer for a newer market. China is an emerging market. The population has become accustomed to that period of time watching this. I think the Star Wars franchise is somewhat of a callback to an era perhaps when China wasn't as active in watching those style of American movies.
Well, they weren't even being released in China necessarily. Even in 2008 when Iron Man was out, I think the number of American films allowed to be released into the market was much more limited. The number of theaters was more limited. Yeah, it is.
And even the spending power, I think, of the Chinese was lesser than today.
It is completely an emerging market. So, but that doesn't necessarily explain why The Force Awakens or any of the newer Star Wars movies haven't really caught on. I mean, maybe there's just something in the mythos or the storytelling that's especially American that it just doesn't translate necessarily to that market or other international markets.
I mean, it must be something. Maybe people just like the MCU more.
That could be
it.
Could
just be their better movies. But I guess something I want to get into, because obviously people are far more interested in hearing about Endgame than Iron Man, and I've unfortunately directed a lot of attention towards Iron Man 1. But if we talk about the Endgame numbers, I mean, like what you said, Danny, I mean, it's not even just it incrementally defeated Infinity War's numbers. I mean, it just blew just right through them. I mean, it's just incredible. I mean, even if you look at the numbers, you look at Avengers 1 opening weekend, that made $207 million in 2012. I mean, 7 years later, Endgame almost makes like 1.5 times that or whatever. I mean, it almost doubled when Avengers 1 opened at.
Yeah. Even look at Infinity War. Infinity War made $257 million. Mm-hmm. So Endgame is Infinity War plus Spider-Man, essentially. That's a crazy thought.
I mean,
I don't think we're ever. I think a lot of people say this, like, oh, I don't think we're ever going to see something like this again in our lifetimes. And actually, for a while before the movie, I was going around and claiming that this is the movie event of our lifetimes, and I genuinely think
now
that.
I think it's undeniable.
It's not to say that it's going to be my favorite movie ever or the best movie ever, but I do not think that we're going to see a movie come out that has this type of draw across the board. These numbers are astonishing.
And then 1 year later, I mean, that would effectively be a film coming out next year that's going to make $450 million opening weekend. I think that if that were to happen, I would be totally shocked. If a film next year makes $457 million?
No,
I can't even fathom what that would be. What would that be?
It's very difficult to predict a franchise that would do it. I did say my wild horse might be Avatar 2, because I do think Avatar was extremely successful for reasons I still scratch my head at, but it was an extremely successful franchise. Mm. there was a lot of, I think, unique factors there when it was released and made it a successful franchise at the time. That said, you can't deny that it was a $2.7 billion dollar.
Well, I feel like with Avatar, I think you're right, James, that I could see Avatar beating Endgame worldwide gross, maybe Avatar 2, but I don't know if I could see opening weekend, because Avatar 1 only opened at 70 million.
And it opened at this point. Not at this point, we're 10 years past it, and whenever, is it coming out in 2021?
Yeah,
2020?
I think it's 2020 is what I thought. That's the last time I read. Like
either
December.
way, it'll be over a decade from the time it came out. And I think a lot of people are like you, James, where they're kind of they look back on it with a curiosity, like what exactly happened.
Yeah.
And there's no reason necessarily to get into that on this podcast, but I just think it's not going to have that appeal. It's not like they've been building something for 11 years of anticipation to see this final act. It's kind of just more a curiosity at this point. What is Avatar 2 and why is it, more importantly?
Yeah, I mean, wouldn't it be shocking? I mean, I don't know. Maybe we'll do this in a year and a half from now when Avatar opens. I mean, is it possible Avatar 2 might make $4 billion?
I guess never discount James Cameron's ability to make a movie that makes a lot of money. But
I think if that were to happen, I would think it's some kind of like scam going on. Like something would have to be going on for that movie to make that much money.
Yeah, I don't think so. But only time will tell.
Yeah, I mean, I guess just to get back to these numbers for Endgame. I mean, one thing that I think is really interesting is that even though it had the biggest opening by far in the U.S. history, I mean, as of right now, 71% of its entire gross is international. So it's not even, here I talked about this a little bit, but it's not even like this is like only like a big thing in the U.S. I mean, these are like people in other countries, like they must be going crazy too, seeing all the ads and stuff as well.
Yeah.
The other interesting challenge in all of this, which makes it even more impressive, is the runtime. And I know you and I talked about this, the challenge of having a 3-hour and 2-minute movie with that kind of a runtime hit this kind of a mark, because it means you're having to really jam the theaters up with this movie to get to that point.
Yeah,
and that's a significantly longer runtime, as I recall, than Infinity War. And going back to our comparison to Iron Man, it's a significantly longer runtime than Iron Man.
Oh, yeah.
You're talking about a lot of theaters you're playing it in. Some theaters, I think AMC ran it 72 hours straight at 30-minute intervals to pack in the times to sell
2 a.m., 3 a.m., 4 a.m. screenings. Like this is not usual. And these screenings, I don't know if you saw on Twitter, like people are taking pictures of these 4 a.m. screenings. They're packed. There's lines to get into the theater.
I mean, to watch a movie at 4 a.m. that's 3 hours long and 3.5 hours long, almost with trailers. I mean, you're getting out at 7:20 a.m.
You have to be very committed to this and really in love with it. And I think a lot of these people are going to go see it again. I mean, the cinema score for this movie is A+. That's Infinity War, which is really well liked, obviously, was an A. That extra plus there, I mean, people are really responding well to it, and that usually is a good indicator of having legs and people seeing it multiple times.
And even the Rotten Tomato score, isn't it still like 97 or 96, something like that?
Yeah.
Last I checked, it was about a 97.
Yeah, I mean, but you do raise a really good point, James. Like, if this movie was 2 hours and let's say 15 minutes, I mean, that's basically almost an entirely extra showing you could have of the movie if it was 45 minutes shorter or an hour shorter. So, I mean, if anything, like, you're right, it actually kind of handicapped itself. If it was an hour shorter, I mean, I wouldn't even necessarily mind that, but if let's say it was an hour shorter, I mean, it probably could have made even more money.
I don't know if it handicapped itself opening weekend as much, and this is purely conjecture on my part, but it might handicap itself to the degree that it has the legs that it could, only because as new movies come out, particularly in May, you'll have to cut down the number of theaters that it's in to some extent. I think when it came out at opening, theaters just cleaned house to fill essentially what they could.
Yeah, they threw their copy of Hellboy in the trash.
Yeah,
so they could have it take
there's no need for any...
Even movies, theaters like ArcLight Hollywood, right? Okay. Which, if you know, ArcLight Hollywood usually plays a good mix of, you know, there's big blockbuster movies, but then there's also the more mid-range adult drama type fares and then kind of art house pictures. But I think this weekend there were only 5 movies showing because, and you know, a couple of them only had like 1 or 2 showtimes on these smaller movies because it's being dominated, obviously the screens are dominated by Endgame, which makes sense from the theater's perspective. They're going to put the movie up there that people are going to go see. And I think what so Avengers Endgame made 357. The number 2 movie, which was Captain Marvel, made 8 million.
Yeah.
So Avengers Endgame essentially had an 89% share of the box office this weekend. That's insane. And I think that's the biggest, I haven't checked this, but it's probably the biggest
I did
per
see
share
that.
of the box office in history. And I don't know if it's good or bad. I mean, I don't know. Obviously, this is an anomaly, but it's nice to have movie theaters that have a wide array of things that you can go and see as a person who just likes to watch movies, as opposed to people who like more people who what Avengers Endgame represents is the eventization of movies, right? Where like a family is like, okay, we've been building up to this for 10 years. This is an event. We're going to go take the whole family. We're going to see it opening weekend. We're going to get the popcorn, get the candy, whatever. However much it costs, it's okay because it's a special occasion. It's more akin to a family going to Disneyland for a day and spending $450 than it is to saying, hey, let's go see the Jonah Hill, or not Jonah Hill, whatever, the long shot that's coming out next weekend with Seth Rogen.
Oh, yeah.
Charlize Theron. That's like, okay, we just want something to do for a couple hours. Let's go see a movie.
Yeah, like The Missing Link. That's just a film where you're just buying time. Whereas
but
Infinity
Endgame,
War, Endgame, yeah.
You felt the palpable excitement in the theater when we went. I don't know if you guys had that.
I felt it.
It is very much more like going to one of Disney's theme parks than it is going to a normal movie theater.
I mean, you're right. The people are so into this. I heard there was one woman that had to be taken to the hospital because she couldn't stop crying.
I think she has deeper issues than just responding.
Yeah.
To
There was also an individual, and I recognize this as we were talking about potentially spoilers after the movie,
Yeah.
or one individual who was beat up outside of a movie theater for accidentally revealing spoilers outside of the movie theater.
At our movie, where we saw it?
No,
Not where we saw it,
just-
somewhere
it
else.
made the
Just in
news.
general, it made national news.
I mean, did they deserve it? Maybe, maybe not. Depends on who you ask.
I guess it also depends on the severity of the beating. I mean,
and the severity of the spoilers. I
Yeah.
guess.
That's true. There's a bicycle chain. It's excessive.
well, if they were Dodgers fans, then the guy will never walk again. But
Very
yeah, I mean,
true.
I guess I want to talk a little bit about, I guess just what your guys' overall thoughts are of the MCU in general, and just, I guess, is how film has changed, or at least the movie theater industry has changed since 2008 to now, and just kind of what's the status of film, I guess, today in theaters, and I mean, what happens next? I mean, is next decade, do you guys think, is it going to be similar to this last decade, or do you guys see a new trend coming at? What are some of your guys' thoughts?
Well, I think, like I was saying before, this whole movie as an event type thing, instead of just appreciating a movie on its own merits outside of the bigger picture that it connects to. Like, I think the unfortunate paradox is that as movie theater attendance declines because of streaming services and TV and whatnot, this type of movie that actually limits the number of movies that could play in a movie house is the thing that draws more people to the movie theater. So it's kind of, I don't know if it's good or it's bad. On one hand, it is driving attendance, which is what we want as people who love the movie going experience. But on the other hand, it's not letting smaller movies breathe. And so maybe there won't be as many of those distributed or released in the future.
Well, I definitely think with streaming services today, I feel like the movie theater or the movie industry now is pretty much feast or famine. This year, the attendance was totally down the whole year, even though Captain Marvel did fairly well. And then Endgame just explodes everything. So if you are a movie theater, I mean, I think that makes it difficult for you to employ people because, I mean, you can't have people work for a month.
Yeah.
So, okay, and then now go home.
I think it's still down though. I think the box office year to year was down like 15% or something.
Wow, even after Endgame.
No, and then after Endgame this past weekend, I think it jumped to like 13%. Those numbers might be, I mean,
Okay.
they might be 1 or 2 points off, but it didn't make that big of a difference, which just goes to show you that like we didn't have last year we had Black Panther, which was huge, and then Get Out, which was huge, and this year we've had Captain Marvel, which was marginally big, and then again with Jordan Peele's movie Us, it was okay. It wasn't quite Get Out numbers wise. So I think it's gonna have to do a lot of heavy lifting. Disney itself is gonna have to do a lot of heavy lifting with their slate.
And that goes to the question of the actual industry in 2008, which is when Iron Man came out, versus the industry today. And obviously we've seen a lot of consolidation I think it's fair to say within probably the big five studios, part of that is
obviously Disney owns Fox.
Fox and Marvel, which are two franchises we've just been talking about, but that also is going to have an impact on theaters and potentially options for consumers that I think want to see the types of movie Danny's describing are probably going to either have to see it abruptly in the theater or wait for it to come to streaming, just because of essentially what would be called the crowding out effect.
Well, I mean, I think essentially what's happened now is that, like what you're alluding to, is that there's not really a big middle class anymore for film. Like, middle class films now go to streaming services. Like, they can't make money really in theaters. Like, films that are, what was like the Force of Nature movie? Or Forces of Nature?
Yeah.
Like a film like that would only come out on streaming services today. Or, you look at a film like When Harry Met Sally, that would never make money in the U.S. box office today. Like, at least big money.
I wouldn't say never. Like, I don't. Well, it's interesting to see. Let's see what happens with Long Shot that's coming out this weekend. Obviously, I don't think it's going to be anywhere near the number one movie, but it's interesting counter programming to watching it. My mom wants to see Avengers Endgame, and she's not into comic book movies at all. She watched Infinity War and she liked it, and she wants to be, I think, a part of the. It's a cultural movement more so than it is a movie at this point. So people want to be a part of that. But when talking to her about, do you want to go see it this weekend? She said she'd rather see Long Shot. So there is still that segment of the population that this isn't their, comic book movies aren't their thing. And so counter programming is a good thing. We'll see where that takes us. But later this summer, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood's coming out, the Quentin Tarantino movie, and that is what you're describing. That's a mid-range, mid-budget, adult-focused movie. It just happens to be that you have to be like one of the great American auteur filmmakers to get it released in the summertime and to get these big movie stars attached to it. So they're still out there. They're just few and far between.
No, I mean, I agree with you. I mean, I guess if we were going to fast forward, if we were going to say like, what does this look like in the year, 2025, let's say, or whatever, 6 years, 5 years from now, I just feel like we're just going to have less mid-range or mid-budget films. I think it's going to mostly be event movies. And then other than that, I think they'll just be on streaming services. And by that time, we'll have 25 of them. So, they're all going to be bidding to buy movies, essentially. I mean, Amazon's paying $1 billion to make the Lord of the Rings show. Right?
Eventually, someone's going to come and package all those streaming services and sell them to you at a fixed rate, and we're just going to have cable again.
Well, I think we know who that'll be. It's going to be Disney. It's going to be the one that's going to create that ultimate service.
Well, Disney's going to scrub anything that's not within the Disney brand guidelines, and so it's going to be pretty bad for streaming. Can you imagine Pulp Fiction, but through a Disney streamer? Anything of that nature?
Yeah, right next to, Tangled?
Yeah. No.
2 options away from that.
It would literally just be probably just the coffee house scene, but before they pull out the gun. It's just a man and a woman getting coffee, and that's it. Gotta take the rest of it out because it doesn't.
Oh yeah, definitely. Every scene with Harvey Keitel you can't even mention.
Harvey Keitel is going to be erased from film history.
Well, apparently their plan now
National Treasure.
Yeah.
would be to put everything on Hulu.
Yeah.
That would be adult, and then Disney Plus would be their.
Which, I mean, we could talk about that whole fact that all the other studios, it seem like they're basically just laying down their swords. Yeah, for I don't know what reason they say, yeah, we'll get you next time, I guess.
But
I don't know. We have Detective Pikachu,
which now
Sonic.
Sonic is
going to be outstanding.
It's getting crucified online, just absolutely crucified. Before we get too off topic though, what are your projections, I guess, or predictions for Endgame? Like, what do you think it could actually do? Like, is it out of the question $3 billion worldwide, $1 billion domestic? Like, what do you guys think?
I don't think it's out of the question. This weekend's going to tell a lot of the story of like how well does it hold. If it drops, if usually movies with an A+ cinema score drop less than the average, so it'll drop maybe around 50% week over week instead of like 70%. If it drops only 50%, and that's 50% of 357, right? That I think we could really be on a run there for not only top domestic earner, but also that Avatar mark.
Well, James, what do you think?
I think it has a real shot at 3, but I'll say, I mean, it does have more competition coming out throughout the month of May. I think it'll create challenges for it potentially, at least in the family market.
Well, it's got Aladdin and Detective Pikachu.
That's the end of the month, right?
I think
Pikachu is May 10th, right?
I don't.
Is that a week from
I don't think so.
this Friday?
Is it?
I think it is.
Yeah.
All
Okay.
right.
Yeah.
I guess. I think
We got
with
a
this
fact checker.
with this movie, I mean, so if we're going by kind of like what you mentioned, Danny, or alluded to, so the numbers. So like, at least from what I was seeing, so it made, what did it make? Like 33 million on Monday, and then I think it made another like 30 on Tuesday, and we're recording this on Wednesday. So if it makes another 30 today and on Thursday, it'll be roughly like 500 million by Thursday or by Friday. And like you said, if it does a 50% cut, so let's say it makes 100, and let's just say for ease of math, $180 million this weekend, that will put it on Monday at 680. It's only been out for 10
Which
days.
would make it the number 2 or 3 all time. I don't.
Yeah, I think. Well, that by that point, I think it would be. Yeah. Would it be? That would be number 4 at that point, because it would. Because it'd be under Black Panther, Avatar, and episode 7. So if it's at 680, I mean, I guess if you keep doing the math like that, so I mean, if this coming a week from this weekend, right? Like if it's another 50%, that's going to be 90 million. So that would already next weekend, and by Monday that would already put it almost 700 million. But then during the week, Monday through Thursday, if it's probably another like 15 million per day, multiply by 4. I mean, what is that like 75 million? I mean, we're talking like a week from this Monday, it could be at like 770 potentially.
And that's just domestic.
Yeah, that's just domestic. So I mean.
Yeah,
I think 1 billion domestic might be a little out of the question, but I don't know. I think it could beat episode 7 though. Because I mean,
that is one of the things that the movies that are in that range. Avatar and The Force Awakens, they both were December releases, so they obviously had the run of the box office because those types of movies don't come out at that time, and Avengers release at the beginning of summer. So there's obviously going to be, like you said, it's going to be competition coming.
Because so The Force Awakens, it made $938 million domestic. So, yeah, I don't know. I mean, Endgame could be at whatever. I mean, I guess by that really convoluted math that I did, I mean, that could be at 720 in basically a week and a half.
Would that make it number 2? Number 3?
I think by that time, it would be number 3.
Yeah. So I don't. We'll just have to see what happens this weekend.
But I mean, this weekend it could easily, if it's put over $2 billion by this weekend, which I think it could be. I mean, we're talking, it could be the second highest grossing film of all time by like Tuesday of next week.
Yeah, that's crazy. It's crazy to think about. I was look at these numbers here. Like it had the number one single day record. 157 million. That's on Friday. And then it also has a number 3 single day record, which was on Saturday, 109 million. So that to me is crazy. On both days, the only movie that made more was The Force Awakens, which was 119. So that's number 2. But it's sandwiched in between Avengers' first day of release and Avengers' second day of release, Avengers Endgame.
Wow.
And then, the Sunday drop was only 17% to 90 million. So, and then the Monday, you said it made like $36 million on Monday, which is the number 1 Monday Q. That's not a holiday Monday, because the other ones.
Oh yeah, because it's
the other
number
ones
3.
were 3-day weekends.
Yeah, but you're right.
And so this was just an ordinary Monday that, I mean, I know a guy that he pretended he had a doctor's office to go and watch it at the Chinese theater. And he just left because that's how important it was to him. He's like, oh.
Well, I think that is one thing. And again, this kind of goes back to a point that you raised, James, and that's that with this movie, it is kind of hard even during the week. I mean, if you imagine, if you're a person that has school or work, during the week, which a lot of people still do, I mean, to watch a 3-hour movie on a Tuesday is kind of difficult if you work that day, and you're gonna want to eat dinner, and you're gonna want to see your kids or whatever, or if even if you're a younger person, you don't have that stuff yet. I mean, there's still the element of get off work at 6, do you want to go watch a movie that's going to take 3 hours and 40 minutes from the point of time that you get to the theater to the point of time that you leave the theater is almost 4 hours? I mean,
Yeah.
that's a heck of a time
I mean,
investment.
I think it would be a challenge. I think the bigger challenge in thinking about whether this movie has legs or not is going to be the role theater managers have to play and essentially putting it into the actual theaters. I mean, you're obviously not going to do 72 hours straight weekends like we talked about every weekend anymore. So you're going to be limiting both the scope and then also obviously the volume of theaters that it shows in as new movies get released. Now, presumably the new comedy that came out that we were talking about, Long Shot, is going to probably not be in a vast number of theaters, but then you are going to have more competition when Detective Pikachu comes out. That's going to start to put a squeeze on the number of theaters you can actually show Endgame in, and you're not going to be able to have your theater staff, your floor staff, your box staff, your concessions working around the clock like you were this weekend. You just can't feasibly have kids, most of whom are either in high school or college, working those kinds of hours.
Well, and eventually, too, I mean, people are just going to lose interest somewhat. I mean, even though Endgame had all this huge buildup, eventually everyone's seen it. So the people that are the most rabid people eventually are going to, I mean, there's only so many times, even if they watch it several times in the theater, they're not going to watch it 20 times in the theater.
This is not going to. It's not. We're not talking about this going on a Titanic type run where it's number one for 20 weeks or whatever. It's not going to do that. Or Avatar. I mean, Avatar built and was just a fixture at the top for weeks.
Its second opening weekend was $70 million as well. I mean, the drop off was almost nothing.
It was negligible. So,
which is complete for a movie with that big of an opening. That's like, I don't think any movie has ever done that since then. A big budget film have its opening weekend and its second weekend almost be identical.
Yeah, that's very.
I can't think of one case of that happening.
So I don't know. But I was just thinking, circling back to what we're talking about with like projecting where we're gonna be in 5-10 years. Like I keep on thinking about how I'm hoping that this is cyclical, and what I mean is the types of movies that are in vogue are cyclical, because when in the 50s, right, there was westerns and musicals. That was the thing that people flocked to the theaters to see, and it seemed probably at that time, from the anecdotes I've heard and things I've read, that was never going to go away. And then the 60s came, and it kind of in the 60s into the 70s kind of got into these weird, more like Easy Rider type movies, and The Godfather, and more All the President's Men. Those types of adult dramas kind of really made a lot of money and also were critically successful. And then you had like action movies, or there's also Jaws in there, kind of kicking off this box office thing. So, I mean, superheroes, comic books, these are the things right now in this decade. In the previous decade, I mean, it kind of started. We talk about it starting with Spider-Man, maybe even X-Men. Some people say Blade, but I don't. They're just talking.
I mean, Blade was a good movie, but I don't think
I like Blade. But
I mean, I loved it a lot as a kid.
But since we're talking about like this iteration of the MCU in this phase, look at Iron Man. I mean, it was no one really knew outside of, unless you were an avid comic book reader. I don't think the casual audience knew who Iron Man was as a character. Robert Downey Jr. was coming out of rehab. I mean, he wasn't any kind of like box office star. So the fact that it took off the way it did, it's a testament to how that was a great movie, and they were made smart choices with casting and all that. And that really shot this into high gear. I don't think it's gonna last forever, and I don't want it to last forever, because we need variety as a people. We evolve as our tastes change, and we'll come back around hopefully.
I think you're right. I mean, I think one thing I haven't heard anybody allude to this either is Jon Favreau, the guy that directed Iron Man 1, also directed Jungle Book and Lion King.
Yeah.
So you have to wonder, is he building a cinematic universe for the next decade of the Disney live action?
He's doing The Mandalorian also, right?
Yeah. So is he building the Disney live action cinematic universe, whatever that acronym would be?
I don't know.
But you have to look at, I mean,
DLC.
Realistically, there's always trends that kind of match, or if not match, respond to, as Danny was saying, whatever the culture is at the time. And right now, for whatever reason, the culture longs for these types of superhero sagas. Westerns were in vogue for a while in the 50s, and then it became more about kind of space exploration stuff too, but it also became about different themes and stuff when the Vietnam War happened, distrust in government, a lot of things like All the President's Men, these types of movies too. And now I think there's just people want escapism. People want to see this type of movie.
You're right.
If The Sisters Brothers was released in 1958, it would have been the highest grossing movie of that year.
Now that's a film that
Instead, it's a movie that probably people listening to this podcast are like, what's The Sisters Brothers?
Yeah, I mean that's something you just have to go. I wish I had watched it when it was in theaters. I feel like it was in theaters for like 2 weeks and I missed it.
Unfortunately, I caught it. Yeah, it was a good movie. It's on Hulu now.
Is it on Hulu?
Yeah.
So I guess before we go, what are your guys' final predictions, both domestic and worldwide? If you guys decide to throw some numbers out there.
Domestic, I'm gonna say it takes it. I'm gonna say 950.
Okay.
And international, I'm gonna say 2.8.
2.8, but okay.
Yeah.
I'll go even higher. I'll say domestic. I'll say 1.05 or something.
Ooh,
wow.
So a little over $1 billion.
Yeah, international. We'll just go with 3, even 3.
I'm gonna take both from you guys. I was thinking 950 domestic and 3 billion worldwide. I mean, I honestly wouldn't be shocked though if it doesn't hit a Force Awakens domestic. I don't know. I guess we'll just have to see if the Steam continues going or not, because I don't know. Already day-to-day tracking, it's a little bit like Force Awakens isn't far behind it already. So I don't know. I guess we'll have to see. But yeah, I guess that'd be my predictions. But all right, well, definitely thank you guys for coming on, and thank you guys for listening, and hopefully you'll like this, and hopefully the numbers won't be way off. All right, take care.